Alright, what is happening, gang? So, since winter is keeping me from climbing, I thought I would finally produce this video on building sport anchors. And the way I'm going to go about this is using this little setup here at home base. We're going to go over just actually creating them, some little nuances in creating them, and then I'll show you a video of myself doing this outside. So if you were to look this up online, you probably, I haven't really seen any real bad advice. I believe AMGA has like this ridiculous acronym called Serene SA. Solid anchors, or small anchors, which is the beginning, and the SA part of it. I forget which is the order. Redundancy, equalization, and then no extension. All right, so that's not bad advice. Though I would say that I'll explain what each of those are when we set this up, but I think the important takeaways from all of doing this before I get into it. Yeah, redundancy, totally important. You just want backups to make sure that you're not hanging on by one point. There's definitely times during this process that you could be hanging by one point. And still make the whole process work. It's just not really advisable, because if something goes wrong, well, there's nothing backing you up. Take your time. Be methodical. Don't get ahead of yourself. And most importantly, when you get this down and when you start doing it a whole lot of times, is to not get complacent. That's really, really easy. And I think complacency is the cause of most errors, mistakes, problems that occur when building a sport anchor. So, a couple notes on this too. I think the rings or the hangers that you would encounter on a sport climb would probably normally be bigger than this, but again, I have seen all sorts of crazy setups to top of climbs. Some of these things, haven't been, these climbs are bolted 40 years ago. So who knows what's the top bum. And it's not always going to be this nice, neat setup for yourself. So it's good. It gives me a chance to actually show you some things that, I probably normally wouldn't do, but just because the situation demands it. But again, if you follow those fundamentals, there's no wrong way. So let's just go through this real quick. I get to the top of a climb. I encounter thus. So the first thing I need to do is get myself clipped in to actually finish the climb. And in this scenario, I'm going to clip my two rings here, get myself clipped in. All right, cool. And I can ask my belayer to say take. That would take up tension. I'm hanging here. Now, normally, I would not clip hard points into these rings. These are the wrap rings, by the way. And I try to avoid it as much as I can. Sometimes the situation just demands it. And it's like, if that's what you have to do, do it. There's nothing wrong with that from a safety standpoint. The only reason I don't do it is because, and you can even see the little notches in these particular rings, this is what your rope goes through. And if you were lowering or being lowered off of these climbs, or even if you wrap, because you have to pull the rope through, the rope is going to move through these things. And the rounded end, they're designed to kind of keep like rotating and provide a smooth surface that the rope can move through. Over time, you'll notice on rings that are very old that they'll get these grooves that form in them from the rope, rubbing through it. And that's one of the reasons why it's sort of, if you can rappel, you should rappel, because it prevents all that rubbing, that like force of the rope rubbing through the ring. But the other reason I don't, or the reason I don't attach hard points or try to avoid into the wrap rings is because those little notches and nicks will chew up your rope, or chew up other people's ropes. So if you can avoid it, don't put hard points, carabiners or clip carabiners into the rings themselves. But if it's unavoidable, hey, no big deal. So I get to the top of the climb. I clip my drawels in. Note that my gates here are opposing each other. All right, so if I had like this, that's okay. But what I don't have them is like that. All right, it's a small little safety thing. So the gates are opposing. All right, so at this point, we have to get this thing set up so that I can actually clean the rest of the route. And to do that, I'm going to need 2 points to actually clip into this anchor system right here. Now what I use looks like this. I think I showed this in a previous video. I just made this one up. That's my Christmas present to myself. Commonly what people do is they will girth hitch 2 runners. I think we'll do that right here. Oh. And what I mean by girth hitching is they will take the runner itself, and that's a girth hitch. And then what they'll do is they'll kind of clip this end up on one of the gear loops on your harness, and you pretend these are lockers. You'll notice on my little system here that there's 3 lockers. These guys here with me connecting up to here. So, and then when they finish the climb, what they'll do is they'll take this guy here, clip it on, take this guy, clip it on, and there's nothing wrong with that. That works, assuming these were lockers. The reason I don't is just sort of the loops themselves will snag all your gear. That's fine, you know, there's nothing, you can even do this without it though, which is largely largely without like runners. They make things called personal anchor systems, which just sort of looks like this daisy chain. You can use one of those. Okay, so I'm going to lower off my climb. I've already gotten the top, I've gotten my 2 drawels in, I have my rope into that. I can ask my blair to take up, and that way that frees my hands up to kind of work with all my gear. So we're going to get my system out here. I'll get that clipped in. And I'm going to clip this into the uppermost spot that I can get into, ideally. It doesn't have to be, but it kind of makes things a little easier to work with. Partially just because it separates everything. Make sure I get my lockers locked. So, yeah, if I had regular beaners here, I could totally do this. And you would probably be okay. Obviously, if something were to fail, there's less likelihood the gate is going to open, and then you'd be in real trouble. The other thing it does, too, is it slows you down, which is not a bad thing, necessarily. But it also prevents you from just accidentally unclipping it. I mean, imagine if this beaner was the exact same as the beaner here on my draw. And so the next step after I weight this is I'm going to clean these guys. And I don't want to have to accidentally unclip my my beaner here. I mean, it would be hard to do as these would have be weighted, but maybe I'm in a scenario where I have a good stance. It's just all part of those little nuances you need to be aware of as you're doing this. But now that I'm clipped in and locked, I'm going to ask for slack and slowly weight my system here. And you'll notice we have a nice shallow angle right here. And that the 2 runners are equalized. So I have equal weight on both of my rings right here. That's also part of that acronym you mentioned earlier. If I were to be using drawls in place of these, while possible, the angle between them would be very splayed. And that's just adding force onto these guys right here. That's just unnecessary. Cams that, you know, that you stick in the cracks that kind of hold your fall, they operate on the same principle. They generate far more force outward than what during the fall, which is why you want a nice shallow angle right here. But now that we have our system weighted, and equalized. I'm going to first clean these guys. It makes things a little easier. You wouldn't technically need to clean these until the very end, but I don't really think it's doing any favors not doing so. Now, there's two ways of doing this next part. I'll do both. I'll show you my preferred method first. What I'm going to do is pull out some rope and make a bite. And I'm going to pass that bite through my rings. And I missed a step, but I will, gives me a chance to show you what I could have done to fix it. I'm going to then tie a bite into my rope. I'm going to grab my ATC, which has a locker on it. This is the important part of this. And clip my bite into that. And at this point, I'm tied in at two spots. If these guys were to let go, this would catch me. And if one of these knots were to go, my belayer could hopefully catch me. But to complete this, we're going to untie the knot that is tied directly into my harness, not this one. If I were to untie it, it's not a disaster. The rope would probably, it would probably just hang there, but it could pull through, and then you're just right back to where we started. But at least you still have the rope. So the other advantage of doing it this way is that you're never untied from the rope and from all the draws that the rope is clipped into on the way down. So assuming that your belayer is being attentive, if something were to fail here, you wouldn't be decking. And so now at this state, I can ask my belayer to take up. Now I mentioned just a minute ago how I missed a step, and that is preventing this part right here. You can see the rope is twisted around my runner. This isn't bad necessarily. I mean, we can still make this happen if this were to happen, but if I forgot to do the step that I missed, and I'll show you that when I show you the other lowering method. But I can ask my belayer to take up. When I do that, it is extremely helpful to my belayer, and will be helpful to yourself if I were to pull up as much as I can. So then they're going to put tension on this rope. And now our two runners here will be nice and loose. Alright. You also notice that I can freely move this guy around. And again, this comes from experience of doing this and understanding what parts of this the anchor system that's in the rock will come to tension on what. So, for instance, if I were to have clipped this thing behind it, when I'd bring tension on the rope, this ring could bind into that draw, and it makes it a pain in the ass to get it back out. Or if I were to pass the rope in, maybe I was clipped straight into the wrap rings, knowing to place the rope in front of that beaner as opposed to behind it, it's just how I'm sorry, this would have been more ideal. But when everything comes to tension, what is going to bind on what, and how do we avoid that? It comes with experience. So in the general case, if you're clipping in up here, clip it in front. Your beaners always want to be in front of either the system that's in the rock or the rope itself, because that's what's going to, those are the parts that are all going to pull back in towards the face, away from you. So at this point, you'll notice that the rope is being passed through the two wrap rings, and that's all it's holding me on. I could take one of my runners here and clip it into the rope, And that way, as I'm being lowered, it's really steep, it just kind of keeps me in line with the climbing line, which makes it a little easier for cleaning gear if you're going to be doing that. Otherwise, you can just ask your belayer to lower you at this point. Now, I mentioned that there are two methods for building this. And I'll do the other one, and the other one is a far more traditional method. It was the method I was taught. I don't like it because there's a part of it where you get untied from the system, and it has the potential of dropping the rope, which happens far more than I think we would like to admit as climbers. In fact, there was an instance not terribly long ago down the red where somebody did that, and they didn't even clip their runners in. They weren't clipped into the system or into the anchors. So you can imagine how much of a disaster that turned into be. Luckily, no one got hurt, which was very fortunate. I'll just leave this like this. So we'll set ourselves back up, get to the top of the climb. I'm going to clip myself in. Ooh. My gates are opposing, as they should. I ask my belayer to take up. They take some tension, take my weight. Again, I'll break out my system here. Get that in. Clip myself in. Now, the point that I had forgot before. When you clip this guy in, take this runner, so you can see the two ropes right here, behind both, and clip it in. Just doing that prevents it from getting twisted around the runner here. That's simple. I forget to do it a lot, and it's not a big deal so long as you can lift yourself up on the tensions. But if you can't, if you're tired, understandable. Yeah, just remember to pass this one runner behind your two ropes, and everything will be all right. At this point, I'm going to weight my runners here. Ask for some slack slowly, and it frees up these two guys to be cleaned, which I will do so. Alright, so the traditional method by which to do this. First things first, I'm going to pull some rope out, tie a simple bight, clip that onto any spare biner you have on your harness. This prevents you from accidentally dropping the rope in doing all this, because the next step is to untie this knot. Bear in mind that your weight now is entirely on these guys once you untie this rope. If you were to fall now, what would happen is you'd fall, assuming your belayer is attentive, you'd fall the next draw. And hopefully, you know, that will catch you. This will make things extremely awkward, but that might rip out your gear loop, but at the very least there's something there. But once I untie this knot, as of right now, this is all it's holding me on, so make sure this is correct. So I have the end of the rope here. I'm going to pass that through our rings and retie myself back in. And I could have a safety here, but we'll be okay with that. So, now before you ask your belayer to take up, you have the end of the rope tied into this biner right here. We're going to unclip that and untie this knot. And at this point, we can ask our belayer, all right, take up. Again, let's go ahead and grab it and aid that process for them. And that'll put tension, put your weight on the rope and off of your two runners that are hanging free. We can now undo those, unclip that, unclip this, clip it in the rope if necessary. If this is not necessary, so if it's not very traversy, if it's not very steep, you probably shouldn't do this, because over time nicks, and the same reason we try to avoid clipping hard points into these, will build up here, and just rubbing along the rope will tear up your sheath over time. But at this point, again, rope is just going through our rings, all our gear is out, and we're ready to be lowered. Alright, so we're going to wrap. Beginning this, it all starts out the same way. We ask our belayer for some to take up. They oblige. We get our system out here. It could be the runners here. We're just going to unclip this, extend it out, and I'll clip that in. Get ourselves attached to points. Lock it up. And then ask for some slack and tension our system. Now, before I go on, and this is just right in the same state that we've always seen end up before we start our process. Before I go on, it's important to communicate with your belayer before you start the climb, and make sure they are fully aware of what we are planning on doing in terms of cleaning this and cleaning the rest of the route. It saves confusion when you get up here trying to yell to them like what you're about to do, so they know what to do, especially at this process, because this is the point where we say, okay, you can take me off belay. And it's entirely on your own at this point. I have a friend that is deaf. You can imagine it is very important that we're absolutely clear what's going to happen when he gets up here if he's going to be cleaning the route. So, if the climb is not super steep, if the climb is not traversing a lot, this is the preferred method by which to get off. We're not beating up our rings here. Assuming we're comfortable with this, because we're going to be controlling our descent, riding down the rope, then we should probably be seeking this out. Your belayer can always give you a fireman's. You have that option. So, I'll first clean my 2 draws. And just like the traditional method for lowering, I can pull up some rope here, tie a bite, clip it in, prevents us from dropping it. We're going to untie my knot. Oh, by the way, if this is hard to do, pulling the rope through your harness, just if you just pull up and take weight off of it, it'll pull it out. Sometimes it's a little timing thing. You kind of it'll make sense once you're in the position and you need to do it. We're going to take our end of our rope, feed it through the rings. At this part, this is where the rappelling departs from lowering. The preferred method here is to tie a knot, any sort of knot, and then begin pulling our rope through. Yes, I do know this is still clipped in, and I do that for a reason, because by the time you get to the point where this is going to come to tension, there's usually enough rope hanging down here that the rope won't just pull through if you were to accidentally let go, and then thus avoiding dropping the rope, because right now this is the only safety thing from the rope just falling all the way to the ground. Back to the knot. I know some people really don't like doing this. when you're sport climbing. And the reason being is because, one, it is easy to forget that you have this tied when you pull the rope, and then you can accidentally pull the rope all the way back up here, and then the knot gets bound up in your ring, and then you can't get the thing through again. The other thing to note when you do this is it's only effective if the other end of the rope has a knot in it, and if those knots don't touch the ground. If they touch the ground, you're going all the way to the ground anyway. I personally don't tie a knot in the rope. You know, I don't know if that is I mean, if I am trad climbing, I absolutely do, but that's a whole different thing. That's for another video, quite honestly. Instead, we're going to lower this. When this thing comes to this point, I'll then unclip it, untie my bite, and then continue pulling. Eventually your belayer is going to yell to you that this end here is now touching the ground. And then just simply ask for a fireman's. They grab both ends of the rope, and if something were to go wrong in this whole process, they can just put their body weight on the two ropes, and that just will cleat your belay device, and you'll hang there. You know, this, I'm sure I might get critique for saying that, but yeah, the thing with knotting the end of the rope is both ends of the rope need to be knotted, and those knots need to be high enough off the ground that will actually make a difference. Otherwise, it's not. When you have both ends of the rope, both ends of these ropes should be going the entire length of the climb, and so both ends are touching the ground as well. We'll get our ATC. Get that clipped in below this point here. And then both ends on their respective sides pass right through. And we're clipped in. Now, if you have some cordlet with you and you can tie a prusik, I would totally recommend doing so. Because at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to pull up. And now I'm hanging off the rope. My brake hand is engaged. The ATC is engaged. And with the free hand, we're going to undo this. It is a little more cumbersome. Again, just be very careful, be patient. And if something were to go wrong, your belayer hopefully has your fireman's. And at this point, I'm ready to be lowered. If I just release a little tension, down I go. So I'm going to run through this one more time, just for the sake of reinforcing and some, chance to practice. We're at the top. Our gates are opposing, both draws in. We're clipped in. We can ask our belayer to take up. I'll get my system out. Extend my draw here. Let's go ahead and clip that guy in. Screw that shut. Extend the next one out. Remember to pass up behind both the ropes. Clip that in. Screw shut. Then slowly ask for slack so I can weight my system, make sure everything's equalized. And we are free to clean our two draws. Careful not to drop anything. And if you do drop something, it's always rock. Just yell rock. We're going to take our rope here and we're going to pass it through, pull, grab a bite. We're going to pass it, double it up, pass it through our rings. Tie a bite. Get my lock with my ATC. Clip that in. It's locked. You notice the rope's not twisting around this guy right now. And then I'm going to untie my original knot. pull that through. Ask my belayer to start taking up. I'll help out by trying to pull myself the best as I can. And when there's tension on the rope, these guys should have slack. I can undo that. Maybe clip him in. Undo that. Let him hang free, or maybe I can clip in while I'm cleaning something. And I'm ready to be lowered. So that's it. Practice, practice, practice. Be methodical. Take your time. Remember that notion of redundancy. Climb hard, guys. Be safe. Have fun. Take care.